Could I please welcome to the podium our first speaker. Barry Garner is the author of Heroes and Daydreams and Halos in the Windscreen, a title that I think I concocted for him. We have been accomplices in many schemes and dreams. We have been letter correspondents for 20 years or more. He lives with his family here in Sunbury, and they're all here in the second last row. Give a wave. He is a daydreamer, a veranda sitter, an orator, a protagonist in many public conversations. He is my dear friend. Could you please welcome to the stage and give a rousing Sunbury Twilight Feast welcome to Mr. Barry Garner.
What an introduction.
It was not bad, was it?
It wasn't bad at all. You're getting better as you get older. And boy, you're getting older. But who isn't? Well, gee, there's a lot of you. Can some of you go? I wasn't planning on talking to this many people. Here we go. This is my bash on my reflection on the poem of Nazim Hikmet. It's funny, really, that I have been asked to write about living when there have been so many times when I've wished I was dead. My journey with mental illness, or as the psychiatrist calls it, bipolar disorder, has been a roller coaster ride. On my good days, I love the world. I see beauty in the crust of the everyday. On those days, I love life. I love living, love my family, love my history. But often in the past, that love, that clarity is blanketed in grey, and I have lost my grasp on all that I hold dear. I used to think that one way was the right way to live, and the other was a sign of weakness. But over the past couple of years, I've stopped calling myself weak and just accepted myself as I am. My epiphany took place 2 years ago under a plane tree in Wodonga. Once again, I'd been admitted to a psych unit. One afternoon during my stay, I went outside for a smoke, sat under that towering tree, and I thought about all the times my family and friends had willed me to keep on living. Then I thought about that little voice inside myself that was always telling me that I was hopeless, weak, and undeserving of love. As I looked through the branches of that old tree, something inside me shifted. Another voice, a gentler voice, said, "Enough is enough." You can't go on like this. You're 59 years old, and it's time to live. In his poem on living, Nazim Hikmet writes of planting olive trees when you're 70, not for fruit, not for your children, but because you don't believe in death. What a great statement of faith for all of us. I used to believe in death. My own father, a heavy smoker, died when he was 42. I grew up from that point certain that I wouldn't make old bones. Like Dad, I became a heavy smoker. What point was there in living a healthy life when all too soon it would come to an end? When I look back now, I feel smoking was a way of numbing the pain of the loss of my father. It was a ploy I used to try to tame my mental illness. It was a way of saying, death, I don't give a damn. Why would I try and prolong this life, which took me from struggle to struggle? I was in a hurry to experience things because I thought my time was limited. I became a father at 18 and again when I was 20. For the following 25 years, life is a blur of working, trying to be a good father, and battling the demons of self-doubt. 2 years ago, when I had that moment under the plane tree, I decided life was indeed worth living. Since that time, my life has been very different. No longer able to do my paid work, my wife introduced me to the joy of volunteering. Slowly but surely, I realised that by volunteering, by joining something bigger than me, I reaped the precious reward. For 4 mornings a week, Kaz and I cleaned cat cages at a cat rescue in Albury. I made new friends. I felt like I was contributing to society and hence felt useful in it. Having said that, I still have time when life gets away from me and threatens to unravel. I sometimes fall into the trap of wishing I'd achieved more, made more money, been a better provider. But then I think of the homeless people in our city, and I'm reminded of how blessed I am. I have a roof over my head, food in my belly, while many of my fellow travellers go cold and hungry. I reckon at times we all have a tenuous grip on this thing called living. What we have hungered for yesterday doesn't always taste as sweet today. But we should not let that stop us from chasing dreams. I feel now that life and the living of it is a gift beyond words. So tell someone you love them. Watch the sunrise. Find a big tree and be struck by its beauty. Stand tall and barricade. Hickman also writes, even though you fear death, living weighs heavier. And at 61, I think those words are so true. There are times when death crosses my mind, but then I find there is so much I love about life that dwelling on death is a waste of time. To me, living is a bus ride down to Sunbury. It's a drive to Macedon. The way a gum tree catches you after in life. It's telling my wife I love her. I know that I have kids that love me too. Living is taking a risk. It's the new piece you write. It's taking each day in turn and not worrying too much about tomorrow. My wife and I recently moved back to Sunbury after 4 years in Wodonga. So here we are again with a fresh start, a new adventure, a chance to make new connections. Perhaps it's a time to plant imaginary olive trees, a chance to dream more, work more, to love more and live more. Thank you.
think the applause says it all, doesn't it? Father Bob, you've got quite an act to follow, haven't you? You do. Father Bob needs no introduction. Parish priest at St Peter and Paul's, where I went to primary school in South Melbourne since time began. He's a priest, a social activist, an orator, a eulogist of great power. He's a broadcaster. He's done everything imaginable. He's a great man, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce to the Twilight School stage, Father Bob Maguire.
What have I got? What have you got? You've got something bipolar and all that. Bipolar. Yeah, I got chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. There you are. Oh, yeah. That's what the man said when they carted me into the Cabrini hospital. Because somebody said, no, he's just got old, he can't walk, he can't do this. And the nice doctor said, oh no, I think there is more going on. So off we went to Cabrini, and the nice man at the who was on duty was the neurological surgeon. And he said, I think that you've got chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. And the good news, it is eminently treatable. Isn't that nice? See? So words mean a lot, which is why we've called this meeting. Isn't it? Yeah, words mean a lot. So that's only about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And they give you stuff. They give you any plasma donors? Thank you. See? Because the immunoglobulin comes from the plasma. Yeah. So it's your fault. You see what I mean? Because I've got better over those years. See? Which is nice. Because that's the way, I mean, I'd rather you get better the older I get. You see what I mean? I don't want to die just because there's no alternative. You know what I mean? So if a bloody thing falls on your head or something, I mean, you can't do much about that. But I mean, I don't want to actually, gradually, it's time. Because I think, is this anybody old there? See, because I can't work out whether you're as... If they all give you the impression that you're old, well, then you get old, whatever that is. You see? And I think they probably think within their view of the cosmos that you're supposed to get old. Although there's somebody in the paper, was it you told me this morning? Somebody in the paper this morning, 125. They reckon we ought to, But then you see, you've got to keep up and see the universe is keeping up because, in fact, they've now got things, techno things. So when you're old, you see, you can make the space leap via virtual reality. And what's that other reality? The young people, augmented, isn't it? Augmented reality and all of that kind of thing. So they stick goggles on your head and you're off to see the wizard. See? Which you'll say you don't need the bloody goggles because if you go bananas, you see the bloody wizard anyway, isn't it? You know what I mean? Without the goggles. See? So, I mean, I think it's it's an art, isn't it? I told you in the blue room. Was it the green room or the blue room? Well, the humour wasn't blue in the green room. But, I mean, what's it all about, Alfie? Do you remember that? What's it all about, Alfie? How long ago is that? 100 years. See? But it's the question. I'm satisfied with Narnia. I'm happy. When they threw us out of the parish precinct, good luck to them. Well then, all those new archbishop, he might ask us back. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? No. When they threw us out of there, you see, we went down the street to a shop front. So we're in the same area, more or less. But I said to my mob then, I said, look, instead of having a bloody ordinary shop front, what are you selling here? Community. Oh, for God's sake. You know, Albert Park, for God's sake. Can you imagine it? Selling community. Hey? Never heard such rubbish. You know, well, I mean, the elites. You see, they've never heard of bloody community. Poor babies. You see? Which is why we've called this meeting. Because we've got to try to save the elites from a fate worse than death. You see? Everybody thinks you've got to save the poor. See, the poor are all right because the poor have resilience and courage. See? In spades. It's those poor bloody elites that I'm worried about. You see? And also that, what do they call it these days? The narrative. The narrative that says to them, what's it called in the trade? Fear-driven elite panic. Because all you've got to do is frighten them. African gangs. See? And if it's not African gangs, it's going to be, I don't know, what's the most recent one? Your mainstream media will cook up something, because if you could keep the elite and their fear-driven panic, well, then you can control the narrative. You see? What's his name? The Wizard of Oz, Trump. You see? That's his narrative and his base. Keep us all terrified, and you can have another army. And what's he going to have now? He's going to have space warriors, isn't he? We're going to control space, for God's sake. See, they can't even control their bloody selves, isn't it? The wall that they're going to build, I don't think he's told them yet, is not to keep the Mexicans out. It's to keep the Americans in. See, it's an act of benevolence. See, because it was a nice thought, wasn't it? Because he doesn't want to do any more harm than they've done over the last 200 years. The poor bloody Americans. You know what I mean? So this is the ideas, the language, the idea of fear can only be what? Combat, and that's a not nasty word, combat, can only be what? See, you don't want to be violent, because most of the words these days, you've got to be violent. Trash talk, isn't it? You see? Trash talk. Anybody got teenage children? Trash talk. You see what I mean? With all those words, we never use those words in this house, darling. Well, they do. See? It's their vocabulary, see? The first thing to do is to shock, isn't it, poor darlings? And that's what we're missing out on. That's why we've called this meeting. In fact, because we've got to reinstall a language as being, and your poetry preferably, if we could all speak like poets. That would be the vaccine for the virus. The virus is community collapse disorder. I told you when I got down to Albert Park, I said, why can't the front door be like the door of the wardrobe in Narnia? So when people come here, they walk through the wardrobe door. See? And there's all kinds of characters in there. Oh no, we can't do that because it's not efficient. I said, no, darling, we're not talking efficiency, we're talking effectiveness. See? Oh, no, we've got to be efficient, otherwise we won't get government funding. Huh? Well, you know, who's going to fund Narnia, for God's sake? You know, the minister for what? See? Lunacy. Huh? So that's what you see. I'm saying imagination. They're even referring to a thing, and God knows I know I'm in, where am I? Rupertswood, which has got its own history, hasn't it? But you see, there's a thing they're calling these days Catholic imagination, which really belongs to people. It's the devotional kind of Catholicism, the stuff that even I used to laugh at it a bit, you know, rosary beads and what do you call them things around your neck? What? Scapulars and all that kind of, and statues and God knows what else. We used to mock it. You see, we young clergymen, because it was our mothers and our aunties, and they used it, and they got through the night with it. You see, now all of a sudden it's become, oh, guess what? What? There's a thing called not Catholic doctrines and morals, but Catholic imagination. See, so you open the door, you see, and you end up with what? I've decided to change what in my own head. I'm changing from being the Catholic Church to being, what am I going to do now? Hashtag Galilee Gang. See? Because the connotation of being the Catholic is always, you know, the kid goes to the door, knock at the door, the kid goes, opens the door, Mum, there's a man here in a pedophile suit. It's only poor Father O'Flaherty. You see, but in the kid's head, it's been implanted. See, with the collar and that, there's a man here with a pedophile. Well, I said, how are we going to break that, what do you call it, narrative? Because that narrative is taken over, so that poor old Archbishop Comensoli, who's just been appointed the Archbishop of Melbourne, has to say, by the way, I am Peter R. Comensoli. Why? Because Father Peter L. Comensoli is in jail for sexual offences. His cousin, Mother of God. Now, who dreamed that up? Oh, yes, we've got a bloke here we can put as Archbishop of Melbourne because George Pell's going to court, and it'd be lovely, won't it? Who is it? Comensoli. What the? But it's Peter R. Comensoli. So, see, the narrative's a bit like a minefield. So I thought, do you think that was a good idea? Hashtag Galilee Gang. See? Because I think it's all right. You can have a dreaming, you can have a tribe, and you can have elders, which is what the Aboriginal people have taught us. You need the three components. If one's missing, you're buggered. You see? You may as well forget community, you'll never have it. You'll have society, you see, but you won't have community because you've got to have it all. You've got to have the dreaming for a start, which is why we've called this meeting. Because we've got to get to a dreaming. And you've got to have elders, see? What happened to the majority? What happened? What did she say? What dogma? What dogma? Ritual and all that. You can have all that. The hashtag Galilee Gang had rituals. It simply means it's in the social media. They have hashtags and things. And then you can put something afterwards like they did with the African gangs. The Africans said, oh, the mainstream media is saying we're all crooks and we're all causing trouble all over the place. Huh? Oh, the Galilee thing is where the founder of the firm, Jesus, came from. He came from Galilee, which is the bush. See? Jerusalem was the capital. He stayed away from Jerusalem as much as he could because the high priest and the whole clerical management ran Jerusalem. See? Which is why Trump is going to put the American embassy there. Everybody wants to put their embassies there because that is the capital of, you see, dominance. Now, Jesus, you see, his mother said, darling, don't, for God's sake, don't go out with that gang. John the Baptist, your cousin, she said, he's crazy. He dressed up in bloody rabbit skins. He's just gone to the what's his name? The king's palace, Herod. and yelled and screamed out the front, "Come out of there, you rotten, you're living with your brother's wife." That's not nice. See? And they chopped his head off. And your Jesus' mother said, "Darling, can't you get another mob to hang around with?" You see? Which he did. He then ended up with the 12, what do you call it? Yeah, which is the Galilee gang. See? Anyway, listen, it's time to go. Bruno, thank you. All I'm saying is, I don't know, what gets me out of bed in the morning is simply trying to build a beautiful world where the outsiders become the insiders. That's what the church needs to do, and that's what your Commonwealth of Australia. Let the outsiders become the insiders. Thanks.
Presenter, our next orator is Alice Pung. Alice Pung is a writer, journalist, columnist in The Monthly. She's a writer in residence at Janet Clark Hall, a lawyer, a mother, and sometimes she comes for tea and biscuits at my place. She's author of Unpolished Gem, Her Father's Daughter, Lorinda, Writers on Writer on John Marsden, and much, much more. She is married to Nick Cadle, who's in the audience, who she refers to as steadfast, which is a word I've come to really admire more recently, and has one son, Leonardo, awaiting the birth of her second child. Could you please welcome the unpolished gem herself, Alice Pung.
Hi everyone, it's wonderful to be here among friends back in Sunbury. Thank you, Bruno, for having us here and for this special part of the evening where, as Father Bob McGuire said, outsiders do become insiders. From the very inception of my writing career, Bruno has included me in his rotundas, in his events at Victoria University in Footscray, so I feel very supported as a writer from Bruno. So tonight, when he asked us to reflect on this theme on living, I look around the room today and I know a quarter of you. I've been interviewed with Father Bob. I've done many, countless interviews with Bruno. Our friend Steve and Suzette are here, my friend Jack, and of course my husband Nick, who has been, as Bruno mentioned, steadfast and been with me through every single writers event I've done since we've been together. So this is a piece on love and literature, and it's for Nick. When the American writer Michael Chabon met one of his literary idols, he was elated, and so he sat next to this great man, and the great man offered him some advice he'd never forget. "Don't have children," the great writer told him. "You'll lose a book for every child. Each one represents a novel you'll never publish." "You can write great books, Michael," the great man continued. "Or you can have kids. It's up to you." 10 years ago, I was a 27-year-old writer in Iowa, along with 35 other writers from around the world on a 3-month residency. We were isolated from any large city and surrounded by cornfields, and they did this deliberately, Iowa, and that's how they became the UNESCO City of Literature. They isolate all their writers so that you're just trapped with your work and your words and your thoughts and your egos. And they produce wonderful people like Nam Lee and young writers like Eleanor Catan, who won the Booker Prize at a very young age. I got to know the other writers so well by the end of the trip that I could sense whether it was Azim from Pakistan, Maung from Burma, Ferdowsi from Spain, or Young-suk from Korea, even if they were approaching from behind, just by the smell of the smoke from their different cigarettes from different countries. But I became very close to the Jamaican writer Millicent, who was a poet, who was around the same age I am now, so in her mid to late 30s. And she was very melancholy and fell deeply in love with a man she said didn't love her back. Unrequited love can be quite enjoyable and sometimes exquisite for the very young and inexperienced. Most of us might remember those love letters never posted, those poems buried behind a drawer. But for a woman nearing the middle of her life, it was a torment. It bored into the center of her core, and the hole quickly filled up with self-doubt and inadequacy. Millicent quoted Somerset Maugham. She said, "The love that lasts the longest is the love that is never returned." But then I realized that Millicent had never told the man that she loved him, never acted on her love, never demonstrated in any way that she was interested. She was just too afraid. She was afraid he'd turn out not to be the man she thought he'd be, and she was too afraid she wasn't going to be considered all that special in the end, that their relationship would fall short of the sublime imaginings in her mind. I knew the man. He was our tall, bumbling program director, recently divorced. And knowing them both, they could have had a thing going on, he and Millicent. But no, because they were writers. And writers always have a world created in their minds before leaping into any relationship. Oh no, my friend John once told me, this is a John that Father Bob and I both know well, I will never go internet dating again. You don't know the person, so you know what your mind does? Your mind fills in the gaps, and then it's always disappointing when you meet. And I thought about that line, your mind filling in the gaps. And once I stopped spending my annual leave from work going on Buddhist retreats, once my parents had drilled it into me that I wasn't getting younger and all my eggs were drying up, I also decided to try a bit of online dating. On eHarmony, you literally fill in a checklist of 250 questions, so you can go on 100 dates and still think the right one is just around the corner. And any minor flaws or one tiny disagreement could end things. When you start to see people as a checklist, you start to see yourself as a commodity too. And one of my students once told me in exasperation during exam times, this is in relation to exams, I'm a human being, not a human doing. So I stopped going online, giving myself the excuse that I was too busy teaching, when in reality I was too busy learning from life and those around me to fulfill this pivotal biological imperative that my parents thought I should. Life at that stage was too interesting to be interrupted by romance, too filled with good things to do and a feral vitality, these are the words of Arnold Zabel, to write, to be hindered and trapped and monopolized by the thoughts and feelings of another human being. Because that's how, at that point, I saw marriage and children, as it was how it was experienced in our own family. My father was a pioneer in Australia, but my mother was locked out of this world by her lack of language. She couldn't speak English, and 4 kids. The writer John Green said, "Writing is something you do alone. It's a profession for introverts who want to tell you a story, but don't want to make eye contact while doing it." I dated artistic people before who wanted to talk all the time about their craft and about ideas and literature and songs and ethnicity, and it was the most unproductive and uncreative time in my life because I could not hear myself think. Jules Renard said, "Writing is a way of talking without being interrupted." And when that relationship ended, what a relief. I could hear my thoughts again. And then I met Nick. I'd known him since he was 19, when we were at college together, and half a decade later he travelled the world and had been back. First I saw a familiar face at the Box Hill Library. I was giving a talk there, and in a sea of kindly geriatric faces, there was a young one, which is sometimes quite unexpected. He'd come with his grandparents. We arranged to meet up, which led to many meetups, and dinner at his grandparents' where he was living, and where they showed me the oyster mushrooms he was growing in the garage. Here was a man of very few words, but who did things. He could mix concrete, he could cut logs, he could kill mice and harvest bees. He was from Corryong, where the man from Snow River originated from. Our whole courtship was not based much on words or talking, but he was a reader and we'd exchange books. When we got married, Bruno read 3 poems in the church for us. Being married to a writer is not an easy thing because I go away on teaching rounds and work trips, and sometimes a talk that should last 45 minutes can turn into 3 or 4 hours away with people asking for signings and school students with questions. Nick and Leo, our 3-year-old son, come with me to as many trips as they can. And every Saturday morning, Nick will take Leo away and close the door so I can write. But most importantly, he understands the value of silence and solitude. And our lives are not mostly filled with words, so my essays and books are. Virginia Woolf wrote about the importance of a woman having a room of one's own, but more importantly, the rarest gift I've been given in our relationship is a room of one's own in the mind. Near the end of our American trip, 10 years ago, Millicent and I visited Frank Lloyd Wright's house in Oak Park in Chicago. And this is where he started out as an architect. It was a house he built when he was only 20 in 1884. Here was a great artist, we thought, in awe, and it was the first time architecture actually took our breath away. Never in any cathedral, monastery or church had I felt what I felt standing there. It was filled with light and so open plan for Victorian times. And during those times, they liked to cram every room and every corner with furniture, but this was space, this was emptiness. What a genius, I thought. And then our tour guide led us through all the rooms, and we were amazed by each one, and then he led us up the attic. Now, the attic was the smallest room in the house, and that was where Frank Lloyd Wright kept his 6 children. Millicent was still overwhelmed by the beauty of the house, but I thought, oh, wow, what an asshole. The things he gave up for his art. So back to my story about Michael Chabon. Over the quarter century that has followed, while fathering 4 children, he managed to turn out 14 books. Should there have been 18? But then he says, once they are written, my books, unlike my children, hold no wonder for me. No mystery resides in them. Unlike my children, my books are cruelly unforgiving of my weaknesses, failings and flaws of character. Most of all, my books, unlike my children, do not love me back. My Nick and my son Leo hold unending fascination for me. I still do not know them to this day because they are full of surprise and potential and mystery, unlike the finite walls of my imagination. And that, I suppose, is the gift I could give my children as a mother and as a wife to my husband, to let them have spaces in their minds to grow in infinite wonder. Thank you.
Alice Pong. How good is this, yeah? We should give away a few books. Okay, you got your first hand up, and if you answer the question correctly, no, you got to answer the question. Name one of Barry Garner's books that I mentioned in my intro. Beautiful, one book here. Yep. You can collect your prize at the end. You can go first, number 1. Okay. Yes, Sue did. Sue Stewart. Yep. Okay. Elsa Piper's second book is... Oh, no, your family. The Attachment, Barry Garner. Did you get it, Mary? Did you? Sorry, Barry. I think Mary just got in before you. Okay. How many books have we got? How many did we buy on funds that we don't have? Because I still haven't been paid. We've got a few more. One more, and then I'll invite the next guest and we'll give a few more away. Bruno's book that has never been written is going to be called... Writing in the Margins. Did you? Yes, it's true. Barry Garner gets one too. Round of applause. Yeah. So we've given 3 away. Without further ado, Lee Palumbo, which means dove in Italian, doesn't it? I know, it's a beautiful name, isn't it? It's almost as nice as Lettieri. This is Lee Palumbo's first appearance at the Twilight School event. Is that right, Lee? Yeah? You've really dressed up for the occasion, haven't you? You look sparkling. She is, by her own description, a community development worker, and with her husband Norman, who also carries the name Palumbo, which means he's a bit of a dove as well, is a she is a co-conspirator. I think co means with, conspirator with, at the Just Planet Fair Trade Roastery here in Sunbury, where I've had many a delicious coffee. She's also a storyteller and a Sunburyite. Could you please welcome to the Twilight School stage, Lee Palumbo.
when I was a kid growing up in Birmingham, our dad used to take us to a place called Worley Woods. And Worley Woods is a place on the outskirts of Birmingham, an open space. And he would take us there just so we could get out of the house and get out from under Mum's feet. And it was absolutely magical as a child. It was full of these massive oak trees and chestnut trees and birches, and there's these little ribbons of bluebells running around everywhere. And Worley Woods was the first time that I ever saw a squirrel in the wild. Now, we heard the first part of Nazim's poem where he talks about live life seriously like a squirrel. Well, as a kid, I'd spot the squirrel and I'd like stand transfixed because I know you make one move out of line and that squirrel's going to dart off. And the squirrel will be like eating a nut, minding its own business. Along comes a kid, so it freezes too, and then there's this stare off while we're waiting to see who's going to move first. It's always the kid, so I move first, the squirrel darts off at 100 miles an hour, and that's the end of it. But they seem such joyful, jolly little creatures, sort of slightly comical. So when Nazim, in his poem, his beautiful poem, writes, take life seriously, like a squirrel? So I looked up squirrels. Well, what is it with these guys? What was so different about Nazim's squirrels? And, a squirrel lives around 10 years. And it eats its body weight every week. And a squirrel plants nuts all over the place because it buries and hoards things. And they've found that the squirrels forget where they've buried things. So they inadvertently are planting trees onward and onward for the next generation, which is an amazing thing. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming. The female of the species have baby squirrels twice a year, and they have 4 to 6 squirrels at a time. And a female squirrel will actually fight to the death for its young. And I found out some years later, like my dad worked on the rigs, and so he'd be away from home now and then. And the times that he was away from home, our mom slept with the dressmaking scissors under her pillow at night. And she said to us that, well, if anybody comes up those stairs in the middle of the night, they're not getting to my kids because they've got to get through me and the scissors first. She's Irish. And we always felt that safety and protection. Now, in my tradition, as you probably gathered, half Irish, so in the Celtic tradition, pre-Christianity, in its pure form, they held poets very high esteem, second only to the king. And I think it was because poets just tell it like it is in such a profound way that it affects your soul. It's not listening to a straightforward piece of scientific knowledge. It's something that can actually stir you up, and they've realized the power in this. Nazim was a very powerful poet in his day. Nazim grew up in Turkey, and he went as a young man off to Moscow, to university there. And in Moscow, he was profoundly influenced by the Marxist thinking. And he came back to his own country, Turkey, and he started writing poems and plays and other pieces. And immediately the government shut him down and went, "This is communist propaganda." But Nazim cared about his people. He cared about his people, and he cared about his community. He cared about the fact that the wealth was not distributed properly and that people were starving and people were being oppressed by the elite. And he spoke up for those people. And so what did they do? They got trumped up charges and had him jailed. They had him jailed, and they stripped him of his citizenship. He became quite ill in jail, and on one of the amnesties during one of the changes of governments, he fled to Moscow and knew that if he didn't, he'd spend the rest of his life in jail. And in a sort of retribution, or just as a punishment, the Turkish government wouldn't allow his young family to join him there. And he eventually had to divorce his wife so she could continue on with her life. What a cost. What a huge cost. This guy, really sacrificed quite a lot for actually speaking out for people who couldn't speak up for themselves. I find it quite extraordinary that he would do that he would actually go that far, and that his words were deemed so powerful that they were banned until after his death in 1963. And even as late as 1980, it was seen as a crime to be carrying his works because they were so powerful. They might stir people up into revolution. People might dare to think for themselves. People might question the elite. You know, how ironic that after his death, Turkey claimed him back. Yeah. Guess what? He's the people's poet in Turkey. Around the same time Nazim grew up in the early 1900s, Worley Woods was actually part of an estate with a posh house and everything, and all the different rich people would buy and sell this place on and off, on and off. And on one of these sales, all the local people were kind of tired of this, and they were a bit worried that the land developers in the area would actually build on this beautiful piece of woodland. And so what they did was something quite extraordinary. I mean, this is the early 1900s in a very working class area. People actually started to put money together, fundraise, and knowing Birmingham probably stole. But anyway, they got half the money together to buy this property. And then they fell on the mercy of the Birmingham City Council and said, can you help us out here? Well, can you help us out here? And amazingly, Birmingham City Council at the day, usually very pro-development, said, yeah, you know what, we're going to pay the other half. So they paid the other half. And Worley Woods became one of the very first public parks to be funded by the people. And it was called the People's Park. I think Nazim would have approved of that. So looking at this poem, sort of reflecting on this poem, what does it leave us with? You know, I thought about Nazim and his massive sacrifice, and I thought about Nazim and his power of words. And I was profoundly affected by his poem because I just read it over and over again as I was reflecting on it. And I started to think about the power of words. And I started to think about the stories. Now, my father, he passed away 18 months ago. And on that path towards the end, he'd developed dementia. And you know what? There's actually a gift in dementia. Because in those years, Dad would start to remember some of the stories he'd forgot to tell us. Or some of the stories he thought might have been inappropriate to tell his daughters and son. And so he would tell us these incredible stories from the war and when he went AWOL and all sorts of things that he did. And it was profound to actually hear this. It was another dimension of our dad that we'd never heard before. And it made me realize the power of stories. The incredible power of stories that we all have within ourselves. And each one of us sitting here has a story to tell. And each one of us here needs to tell that story, or read that story, or write that story, or act that story, or draw that story. And don't make it a smooth story. Don't give your perfect story. Don't give your Facebook story. They're round and smooth, aren't they? Mine is. They're round and smooth, and they're spheres, and spheres just bounce off one another. Tell your jagged little stories. Tell your jagged, broken little stories, because it's in those broken little stories that we lock together. It's in those broken little stories that we're strong and we're united. One morning in Moscow, Nazim got up to go and get the daily papers, as he always did. He went down the 4 flights of stairs from his flat, got the papers, and on the way back, by the time he got back to his flat, he was having a massive heart attack. And one of his friends, another poet, said he was clutching the papers to his heart like they were the planet and all of its hopes. Nazim left us with words that have had an effect on us. Right? They've had an effect on us generations to come. There's an understanding that our place on the earth is being affected by the 7 generations that came before us. And we will go on to affect 7 generations. Here we are 3 generations later talking about Nazim and his poetry. Take your story, take your life, and make it have an effect for generations to come. Thank you.
How many more books have we got to give away? Bernadette? 2. What is the name for another? 2 more? Yeah. What is the name of the cafe that Lee Palumbo runs with? Is that the correct name, Lee? Yes? Okay. Leanne down the back has won the book, yes? Beautiful, beautiful. Our next speaker, something very, very different, and she's madly scribing notes. Father Bob, I thought you came seconds because you had to go home, but you're still... Father Bob is fascinated. Our next speaker, critically acclaimed cabaret spoken word artist Amy Bodossian. Never encountered that surname ever before. Is an eccentric, by her own description, an unforgettable performer who's been captivating audiences for over 10 years. She only looks like she's about 16 at the moment. She's appeared on the ABC and performed at major festivals across Australia. Finger magazine says, quote, "There isn't a pigeonhole in existence that could possibly hold Amy Bodossian. No warning, no apologies." Amy has just released her book, Wide Open. Could you please give a raucous welcome to Amy Bodossian? Do you want this?
Yeah. Okay. Hello. Oh, it's so little. Just so here we are, living in all our fractured and beautiful glory, all the facets, the juicy, writhing worms of humanity here. Okay, so sorry I've got my phone, which is so repulsive, I think, that I've got my phone that I'm going to be like referring to. I wish I had a nice piece of paper, but I don't have that. And I feel a little bit underprepared, but that's like, I always feel like that. Even if I was super prepared, I'd still feel underprepared. So I figure, don't prepare at all, because what's the difference? Okay, so here I am, and okay, so I don't really know what I'm going to say. I have no idea what I'm talking about, so you can feel comfortable in your own inability to, your own fracturedness, because I'm just here vomiting all over you, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So this poem, just doing a bit of a Father Bob without the seniority, without all that wisdom. Anyway, so the poem that we were looking at. What is the guy talking about? What is this dead poet talking about? So I looked at this poem and I was like, have you guys read it? Do you know the poem? Probably, maybe. I thought, Bruno, you're going to read the poem. But you read a bit of it. Enough. So basically, I was like, what's he talking about? This guy's just riffing on life, philosophizing on the human condition. And I thought, okay, he's kind of talking about this irrepressible life force that I'm demonstrating for you right now. That's like, this just keeps going and going, no matter what, it just keeps on finding a way. And in the poem, it's like trees, growing towards the light, just ever growing. But we have this consciousness, like this awareness of death, which sort of makes us value the moment, like really have to value it because we know we're going to die, but also kind of takes us out of the moment at the same time. And it's this constant tussle between those two, and that kind of is the human condition in a way. Oh boy. Yep, just la la la. And that is the human condition, Yep. And it's fascinating because in the poem he sort of says, like, if you're in prison, you have the ability, you have this irrepressible life force and you live with the animals outside. But if you're on the battlefield and you're about to die, you're worrying about the news. You're thinking about the news, like, can we be in the moment? But he's then asking us to be in the moment. It's very confusing. And that is the human condition in a nutsh case. And I I have always been fascinated by this because I have obsessive compulsive disorder. So I don't know if anyone knows about that much. You've got it, so you know about it. It's a lot of fun, isn't it? Real fun. So basically, I'm obsessing and ruminating the whole time, all the time, and then you have these compulsions, and then you obsess, and then you have a compulsion. A classic one would be hand washing, like, oh, am I contaminated? What did that touch? It's a feeling, rationally that you're not really contaminated, but you feel. It's like a neurological, like a nervous system, mental glitch, and then you wash your hands, and then it just keeps interplaying back and forth like this. So I ruminate and I obsess a lot. So I've come up to come face to face with this intense obsessional thing that takes me out of the moment. But I feel like my natural character is very in the moment and very whatever that means, we all ruminate. I just do it on steroids. But, this interplay between the two is super fascinating to me and always has been fascinating to me because I have OCD, and now as I near 40, I'm getting better at understanding that I have it and what to do with it and how to kind of work with it. But I don't know what I'm saying now, really. Lost my tangent. But basically, I've gotten into meditation and mindfulness, and I do therapy. And as I near 40, I'm kind of in the poem he says, live like you're never going to die. And it's kind of this huge, massive sort of thing to live like you're never going to die. And I've always personally found that kind of thing quite intimidating, be in the moment. And none of us are really in the moment, much of the time, because that is what it is to be human, is to obsess and worry. And, but as I've gotten older and kind of comfortable with my OCD, I'm aware through meditation and other things, I'm getting better at being okay with sitting with that and the writhing and realizing that's part of it and that's okay, that is part of being a human, and I'm getting more comfortable with that. And as I near 40, and these questions that loom large, what have you done with your life? What are you making of your life? What is a life? It's my life doesn't really look like I thought it was going to look now as I approach 40. And I don't think for anybody that it really does, because it shifts as we grow older, and, it's good to have hopes and dreams, and that's great. But as I've gotten older, a lot of my hopes and my dreams have had to relinquish, but then excitingly new ones will pop up and grow in its place. And it's kind of like letting the world speak to you. And I feel like what is a life, this irrepressible life force that we all have, we're all here today now, which is a testament to our irrepressible life force, that we're breathing, that we got out of bed this morning, that we made a cup of tea, that we talked to a friend, whatever we do. Where, with our pathology and our nervous system and our childhood and everything that's been given to us, we've done the best we can thus far with this. That's why we're sitting here right now today, which is a miracle in itself. And I just want everyone to know that you're doing really well. We're all doing really, 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 really well. And that life, what is a life? It's kind of about, I wanted to address that it is about the moments where we are struggling. It's not about that, it's about the good moments as well. That to acknowledge the mundane and the struggle and all of that stuff, and when we're feeling horrific, that is part of it. And that I think there's this great thing, these ideals that we want to live up to, and we want to live this life, this amazing life. And on social media, we're putting our best foot forward, and Beyonce has an amazing life, clearly not that amazing because she's constantly striving for more all the time. So the human conditions at work there pretty intensely. But anyway, I wanted to sort of do a poem for you. That's what I want to do because I'm a poet. So I'm going to do a poem that I wrote when I was in I was in the depths of doing therapy for my OCD, and I kind of unpacked this stuff in the poem. I was I was really struggling day to day, and I wanted to be living this incredible life, and I felt what am I doing? And the poem says it far better than I could in my preamble. So I'm going to do the poem for you now. Lovely. My heart's beating. Oh, I'm really alive here, really living right now, just alive. So alive, deeply throbbing and alive. Okay. This was going to be so much more fun. This one. Anyway. Oh, look at that. Fantastic. Gosh. God. Okay. So this is my poem that I wrote when I was in the, OCD. Well, I'm still there now, but I'm, every day in every way we're getting better and better and wetter. That was an ad in Adelaide for the Crazy Horse. It goes, the Crazy Horse getting better and wetter. Wow. Anyway, okay. So, what is a life? So here's my poem. I've probably used up all my time now. Anyway. I want to glide effortlessly. I want to shimmy, shake, shine brilliantly before you all like a million diamond eyes. I want to swing from the chandeliers in a memorable dress like it's New Year's Day every day. Yes, I want to go all the way. I want to go to all the places in all the postcards. I want to be a star. I want to fly. I want to soar. I want to go to New York City, baby, and sing on Broadway. I want to be in movies. I want to go to LA, and act all kooky on the red carpet before receiving my award. Thank you. Of course, I want to go to Hollywood. I'm really, really good. I mean, boy, I'm a good actor. Everyone used to say, Amy, you're really, really good. I'm really good. My parents used to say, you're so good. I could go to Hollywood. I really, really could. I want to fly. I want to soar. I want to laugh bare-shouldered in bars. Hold court like a dame, like Mae West. I want to throw my head back amongst crowds of men who are all dying to know my name. What's her name? What's her name? I want to wear a real diamond necklace bought for me by one of these suitors. Thank you. I want to be amorous and reckless like Daisy in The Great Gatsby, I want to be careless with my insatiable libido, tearing up the night to stride those hungry eyes, riding waves of lust till first light, unstoppable, gorgeous, magnificent, full of life. I am full of life. I am gorgeous. I am desirable. I am, and I can have any man. I mean, look at me. I can. Really can. I want to be like all those people I see on Facebook, glittering like gold, unencumbered, so cool, man, with their coloured hair and their hip jackets and their youth and their groups of friends doing workshops in London and Berlin and France. Man, I want to dance on stage like that lady wearing the feathers, yes. And I want to have her baby, the cute little coffee-coloured one with that spunky tuft and those big beaming eyes, so cute. The 7-month-old who's just been to Sweden for the very first time. I've never been to Sweden. I want to drink cocktails in the sun. I want to be the one in Nigeria who's just built that orphanage. My goodness, I want to build that orphanage. I want to organise community projects. I want to be stoic. I want respect. I want to be like him with his long dreads. They're so long, who travels the world with musicians. Yeah, I want to be like them on Facebook with their hair and their clothes and their achievements. I'm beautiful. I'm intelligent. I'm desirable. I'm compassionate. I want to go on really intrepid mountain hikes, you know, and I want to wear a really nice, expensive ring, like the one my old housemate is now wearing in all of her photographs, because she's married now, my old housemate, the professional ballerina. Of course she is. She's so beautiful and perfect and clean. I just want to be like her. I want to be like that. I want to be like them. But I'm not. No. Lately, I'm barely limping, really. I'm like an old dog with cataracts. I'm not really doing any of that impressive stuff. I'm just a crumpled little tissue on my bedroom floor, flecked with yesterday's snot. I'm not doing anything outstanding. I'm not in New York, holding court in bars, riding around in fancy cars. I mean, I guess I could be, maybe. I mean, anyone maybe could be, but, you know, back here at home, I don't even own a car. And some days, I don't even have enough money on my Mikey card to get into the city. I want to be so many things. Yeah, I want to fly, but right now, I'm crawling like a beginner, slowly making my way through the devastation of my past, deconstructing neurosis, sorting through the cards I've been handed, not doing anything outstanding or amazing, just rewiring 36 years of old habits, not doing anything incredible, just painstakingly unpicking the gamut of strategies I've built up over a whole lifetime. Sure, I want to glide, I want to soar, I want to shine, but right now, I'm just sitting in my room holding a 50-cent piece as part of my exposure and response prevention therapy. Because I've got OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. Obsessive, you got that? Obsessive compulsive disorder. Oh, that's obsessive, you get that? Get that? Obsessive compulsive disorder. And if you think money is contaminated, man, you can only imagine how disgusting it is to me. So for a period of time, every day I sit and hold a 50-cent piece. And another personal favourite is sometimes I hold a plastic lid, because very interestingly, plastic is kind of icky to me. So for up to 5 minutes intermittently throughout an hour each day, I sit and hold a plastic lid and resist washing my hands, saying to myself, Amy, you can. Oh, you can. Oh, you can. I could be working on complex theories, but at the moment I'm just learning to count to 3. I would love to speak Spanish and French and Arabic, but right now I'm just doing my ABCs. I mean, one day, you know, I would love to play Bach and Beethoven and Chopin, but at the moment I'm just tinkering away with Mary Had a Little Lamb on my untuned piano in my big old lounge room, wearing my scruffy shoes and my thick glasses. Yes, I want to be so many things, but I'm just doing my best right now, you know? I'm just doing this, just sitting, feeling a plastic lid against my palms and breathing deep. And working hard, man, really, really hard. And that's okay, right? Today, the plastic lid. Tomorrow, Wembley Stadium.
And really, what's the difference, you know? As long as we are naming them, these hounds in our minds, as long as we are making them our friends, what even is a life? Really, my friend who has MS used to actually trek great mountains, and now some days for her, just getting out of bed is exactly the same thing. And really, I think I know that behind the glossy sound bites, behind the 15 minutes of fame, you know, we're all just struggling in the dark. We're all just doing the same thing, you know. We're all just writhing around. And maybe got that bit a bit wrong. Just do that bit again. And really, it's quite fitting, really. And really, I know that behind the glossy sound bites, the 15 minutes of fame, we're all just struggling in the dark. We're all just doing the same thing. And the stark realization that acclaim is pretty thin, really, and that maybe being able to admit that today one's greatest achievement was touching a plastic lid is something worth celebrating. So pour the champagne. I want to fly. I want to soar. I want to go to New York City. Like, I want to be somebody. I wanna go all the way. I want to climb mountains, man. I am. Every day, I am climbing mountains. So pour the champagne.
She's no stranger to the Twilight School stage. I think when we first started conjuring up this little dream, she was one of the very first to come out. We had a picnic out there. Alice was part of it all. She wrote a beautiful piece about the really sad history of this very building, and it was very brave of her to do that, and we kind of started bringing this all out into the open, and I have utmost respect and admiration for her for doing that. Elsa Piper, I've said that already. Of course, she's written Singing Across Spain, and she's done more Caminos than I've had hot breakfasts. She has written articles for our magazines here and conducted workshops and performed poetry here too. She actually chased me around the room one night, which was very undignified. She is an actor, she's a director, she's adapted plays, she's conducted interviews at festivals. Her latest book is called The Attachment, which she co-wrote with Tony Doherty, a Catholic priest in Sydney, a Monsignor. She has flown down today, as I said at the very beginning, to be here because she just loves the Twilight School audience. Could you please give an irrepressible welcome to Elsa Piper.
Hello. I read this thing recently, just before I start. It said that in the Bible they refer to God as both... Bob's left at this point because I'm about to do Bible. They refer to God as both a poet and a sculptor. And the woman who wrote that said, it doesn't tell you much about God, but it tells you quite a lot about what the writers of that book thought of poets and sculptors. I really like that. So poets, I often say, are my prophets, if not my gods. So it's nice to be talking about a poem. Thanks, Bruno. Living is no laughing matter, Nazim Hikmet wrote in his poem On Living, and I agree with him, most of the time. You must take it seriously, he insisted, and I'm sure he's right, for him and for his life, but not for me. I am a serious puppy. I'm all too fond of the sight of my own navel as I contemplate the whys and wherefores of the world. I take life too seriously. I push too hard. I strain to live up to some impossible, unseeable goal. I ache to get it right, whatever it is. Bruno said to me when I was preparing for tonight that I should worry less. Just let go, Elsa. It'll be fine. Didn't you? You did. But living is definitely no laughing matter for me, if I'm left to my own devices. Fortunately, though, I'm not. Fortunately, many of those I love are light and playful. They're quick to joke and they're prone to pratfalls. They are my saviours. They rescue me from myself. I'm not quite sure where this tendency to seriousness originated. I am the daughter of two laughers. Where poetry was concerned, my mum preferred The Owl and the Pussycat to Pasternak or Poe. A few months before she died, I recall her acting out her favourite game. My sister will recall this. She would fling herself onto her back on the floor and pretend to be a beetle unable to roll back up. She would collapse into giggles at this, choosing to be daft in the face of death. When she was nearing the end, barely coherent due to the morphine, she asked me to sing her favourite song, Moon River. As I began a shaky warble, she shook her head and whispered, "Mime, mime." Living was no laughing matter for her in her last year, but she refused to take living seriously. My father has a stash of dad jokes and one-liners. Show me the man who has his 2 feet planted squarely on the ground and I will show you a man who can't put his pants on. He delivers punchlines and his shoulders rock with laughter, his fading away in pleasurable affirmation of his comedic skills. Mum and Dad didn't have any of my privileges: university education, international travel, literary festivals. They were from hard-working country stock. Mum grew from the red desert of WA and Dad was formed in the wheat belt. Neither of them could speak French or Italian or read Shakespeare or Chekhov, yet they knew something that I am still trying to learn: that the world is a place for fun and that our best task is to help others to find laughter where they can. Mum died back in 1994. She was 57. It was cancer. No laughing matter, to be sure. Before she died, she lost husbands and friends, she lost homes and dreams, but she stayed wedded to nonsense. And she left behind the best gift, her life story. She wrote it for her children in the year before her death, knowing that time was running out. She told her tale of love, loss, and disappointment with a light touch, insistently recalling her naughtiness and waywardness. She focused in her account on pleasures and victories, however small. When she wrote on living, she described making fun in the face of sadness, whether it was placing a Freddo frog on a pillow to welcome us home, or dancing wobbly pirouettes on a beach in an impersonation of her owl and pussycat. Mum chose cheeriness over seriousness whenever she could. I am older now than my mother lived to be, so I have no picture of how I might age physically, whether I will develop osteoporosis or arthritis. But I hope that as I get older, I can let myself get a bit more silly. The dictionary defines that word, silly, as showing a lack of common sense or judgment. I disagree. On those terms, I think their definition's silly. I prefer the words of Clive James, who wrote that common sense and sense of humour are the same, moving at a different speed. Sense of humour is simply common sense dancing. My parents both had to find big quantities of common sense to get through many days devoid of laughing matter, but they both let that common sense dance when they could. Last Christmas, I received a single-spaced, almost entirely typo-free manuscript. It was a memoir entitled "Many Are the Memories." The author was my father. He'd written it as a gift for his children, 4 of us from 2 marriages. In a fortnight, Dad will turn 88. He has always described himself as a lucky man. That's his story. He's lucky. Never mind that Dad's damaged war veteran father couldn't speak to his little son of emotions, or that Dad's adored mother Molly was killed along with her sister, both run down by a speeding car, when he was in his 20s. Never mind that my mother fell in love with another man and left Dad after only 5 years of marriage. In the early 60s, when this happened, divorce meant ugly social stigma for both of them. Dad had to move to the city, where he eventually remarried. But before my stepmother turned 50, she died suddenly in bed beside him. Grieving and struggling to make a living, Dad raised his 2 children from that marriage on next to nothing. Those siblings of mine are sane and kind, like Dad. Then, when Mum was dying of cancer and I was at her bedside with my other sister, Alana, the child of Mum's second marriage, it was Dad who kept vigil with us. He cared for us as he grieved too. That was back in 1994. The ensuing decades were not free of further sadness or hardship, but still Dad called himself lucky. These days, he lives by himself in a small unit in Perth. He has a partner he adores and children and grandchildren who love him. He helps out the oldies, his neighbours. He has had more than his share of health issues, but he still enjoys a beer or a red, preferably in company, and against all advice, he continues to smoke. He also insists on telling long and at times inappropriate jokes and to laugh at them as though they're brand new. But still, lucky. How did that come to be his refrain? My guess is that was the story he needed in order to get up in the mornings. And he keeps telling that story, reminding us and himself that he is lucky to have free health care. He is lucky for the safety net of the pension. The poem On Living was written in 1948. Ben Chifley was Prime Minister. The war to end all wars had concluded 3 years earlier, and there'd been a period of nation building here in Australia. Refugee numbers were increased, welfare schemes were dreamed, and the Australian National University was established. This was a time when a Prime Minister could dare to invoke poetry. Imagine hearing these words. We have a great objective, the light on the hill, which we aim to reach by working the betterment of mankind, not only here, but anywhere we may give a helping hand. Dad would have been 18 when Chifley said those words. He was a kid working in a bank. I wonder if Chifley's speech stirred him or whether he was too preoccupied by the fact that the first Holden was just rolling off the production line. Dad always loved cars. Even now, he can still service his. He tinkers under the bonnet, proud of his ability to fix a clunk or a vibration. Anywhere we may give a helping hand. Something about the words must have lodged with Dad. When he moved to the city, he joined Apex and Rotary, and most of his weekends were spent making hospital visits to strangers, delivering clothing to new Australians, or mending fences for widows. As a kid, I resented his attention going to all those strangers. But when I became a widow, I understood what such practical help could mean. It wasn't about the jobs, it was that someone took time, maybe stopped for tea after they'd finished painting or scraping, maybe even managed to make me laugh. Perhaps it was Chifley's call to offer a helping hand that made my dad see himself as lucky. When we feel needed or useful, Barry, self-pity is banished. When our efforts are on behalf of another, our own good fortune, however small, is amplified. Dad never lost his love of the bush, though these days he gets his fix of earth from his tiny rose garden. It amazes him that bankers have become scoundrels, but he doesn't dwell on that. Instead, he focuses on the walk up the hill to the newsagent to buy the morning paper so he can apply himself to the crossword, the only cross word I associate with him. Even though, of course, we have our moments. I would not like to paint my relationship with my parents in an unnaturally rosy light. I've always felt seriously loved by both of them, but that doesn't mean that we are not human. We are different, we always have been. We're mysteries to each other. But I like to think that as I get older, I can see their best bits, the bits that might make me better if I can learn from them. Maybe Mum and Dad would agree with Nazim that life is no laughing matter, but finding the laugh in any matter was their way through. For them it took laughter and that insistence of Dad's that he was lucky. Right now it'd be about I think, 6 o'clock in Perth. The lucky man is probably cooking dinner. He does a mean roast and his spag bol is not bad. And he would certainly have a glass in his hand. If the day has been sunny, he would have spent some time weeding and pruning. He might have cut a rosebud or two if he got lucky. He displays them in small cut glass vases that belong to his mum. If I think about faith, a word that constantly interests me, it might look like an 87-year-old digging a rose cutting into sandy soil. In spite of backaches and best intentions, there's no knowing whether that plant will flourish, flower, struggle, or die. But with luck, the earth will not be a block of ice or an empty walnut, as Nazim describes it. With luck, the earth will yield fruits or flowers, and so will we. I didn't get to see my mother age or to learn from watching her how it might be for me, but I can observe my father and learn from him. I am lucky to have him. We are both lucky to be alive. As he would say, better to be over the hill than under it. Dad's laughter might be the most instructive poetry that I will ever hear. Thank you.